The air in Okedan village was thick with the scent of palm oil, dust, and disappointment. Elizabeth sat stiffly on the mat, her knees aching from hours of forced politeness. Her mother's eyes were sharp with warning. Don't say no. The elders had agreed she would marry Julian, the crippled man who limped through the village with a twisted leg, his cane thumping against the earth like a curse. No one knew much about him except that he lived alone at the edge of the village, in a rundown compound, spoke rarely, and seemed to have a cloud of bad luck hovering over him. At 23, Elizabeth had dreams bigger than the red clay roads of her village. She wanted to move to Ibadan, learn tailoring, maybe start a boutique. But her family was drowning in debt, and Julian, oddly quiet, oddly kind, had offered to pay her father's hospital bills in full. In return, all he asked for was a wife. The entire arrangement made her stomach churn. During the ceremony, he didn't speak much, just looked at her with unreadable eyes. There were whispers that he had once been wealthy, but offended the gods and was cursed to limp forever. She didn't believe in curses, but something about him unsettled her, like he was hiding behind silence. After the wedding, Elizabeth sat on the edge of Julian's bed in his sparsely furnished home, still in her white lace dress. There was no joy, no celebration, just awkward silence and the ticking of an old wall clock. Julian offered her water, limped to a cupboard, and returned with a new wrapper folded neatly. "Welcome," he said. She stared at him, then nodded stiffly. This was not the life she'd imagined, but it was now hers. Or so she thought. Elizabeth quickly discovered that Julian's home was not just quiet, it was too quiet. There were no mirrors, no photographs, no mementos of a life once lived. The compound had 3 rooms, a sparse bedroom, a small sitting room, and an oddly pristine study that was always locked. Every morning, Julian limped to the backyard to tend to his overgrown garden, while Elizabeth swept the compound and stared longingly at the red horizon, imagining the bustling city life she had lost. The neighbors kept their distance. Some crossed to the other side of the road when Julian passed. Others whispered behind cupped palms that Elizabeth was brave or desperate. Julian, though distant, was oddly considerate. He never raised his voice or made unreasonable demands. He noticed when her wrapper was worn and gave her new ones without fanfare. When her mother fell ill 2 weeks into the marriage, he sent a motorbike to fetch herbs from town before she even asked. Still, he was an enigma. He spent most evenings inside his locked study, emerging only to eat, his limp echoing through the corridor like a secret. One evening, curiosity got the better of her. While he was in the garden, Elizabeth gently turned the knob of the study door. It was locked as always. She pressed her ear to it and heard the soft hum of what sounded like a generator and faint clicking, like a computer keyboard. Her brow furrowed. What kind of cursed man used a computer in a village with no electricity? That night, she asked him, teasingly, "Are you doing juju inside that room?" He looked at quietly, his expression unreadable. Then, for the first time, he chuckled. "Something like that," he said. The laugh was soft and unsettling. 3 weeks into her new life, Elizabeth began to notice strange details. Julian's clothes, though simple, were tailored with expensive fabric, Italian wool, silk linings, quiet luxury that no village tailor sold. His cologne was subtle but unmistakable oud, not the cheap, overpowering one found in local markets, but the rich kind worn by Abuja politicians and Lagos elites. She knew because once when she had worked as a cleaner in a hotel, she smelled that exact fragrance on a man who tipped her 10,000 naira just for returning his cufflinks. One afternoon, while hanging laundry, she spotted a man in a dark suit by the tree near their compound gate. He was speaking in hushed tones on the phone and vanished as soon as she approached. When she asked Julian about it, he waved it off. "Probably someone lost. Don't worry about it." But she did worry. That night, she noticed Julian checking his watch constantly, then entering the study and not coming out until dawn. Her suspicions deepened when one morning a delivery van from town arrived with crates of imported wine, spices, and oddly, a new laptop. The driver greeted Julian with a "Good evening, sir," and quickly drove off. Elizabeth, stunned, asked, "How did you afford all this?" He simply replied, "Savings." That evening, while sweeping under the bed, she found something that jolted her heart. A crumpled brochure for the Africa Cocoa Conference, with Julian's picture on the cover. His face was clean-shaven, confident, in a sharp blue suit. The title read, Julian O. Nwoke, CEO Nwoke Cocoa International. Her hands trembled. This wasn't just some cursed village man. This man was hiding. She stuffed the brochure into her wrapper. She needed answers. Elizabeth's heart pounded for hours after discovering the brochure. She couldn't sleep. She kept staring at Julian's face in the photo, confident, handsome, not the bearded, limping man who avoided mirrors. The title beneath his name was too clear to dismiss. CEO Nwoke Cocoa International. She remembered the name vaguely from a radio interview she'd heard once. It was one of Africa's largest cocoa exporters. But what on earth was he doing in Oko Island pretending to be cursed? The next morning she tried to act normal. She served his yam and palm oil stew without a word, but her hands trembled slightly as she set the tray down. "Are you okay?" he asked, looking up from his plate. "Fine," she lied. But as he stepped into the garden, she dashed to the study. Locked. Again. This time, she pulled out a pin and began fiddling with the lock. Minutes later, a soft click gave way. She stepped in and gasped. The room was cool and dimly lit by a solar-powered light. There were 3 laptops open on a long desk, all connected to portable batteries and satellite modems. Financial charts flickered on the screens. Cocoa prices, export data, bank transfers. She saw folders labeled Board Betrayal, Contingency Plans, and Fake Death. Her knees weakened. She'd married a man who had faked his own disappearance. Behind her, she heard a creak. The door. Julian was standing there, his cane resting against the wall, but his expression had changed. No longer timid. His eyes were sharp now, calculating. "You weren't supposed to see this yet," he said calmly. Elizabeth stared, heart racing. Who are you?" Julian sighed, his posture stiffening. "The man you married is not the man you think." Julian sat down slowly, gesturing for Elizabeth to do the same. "I was going to tell you," he said, his voice low, "but not like this." He removed the band, holding back his locks, and leaned back. The CEO mask slowly slipping into place. 3 months ago, I was poisoned during a board meeting in Lagos. My CFO wanted to take over the company. They thought I died. I let them believe it. Elizabeth's eyes widened. "You faked your death?" He nodded. "I needed time. Time to watch, to rebuild, to find out who was loyal and who was not. If they knew I was alive, they would try again." He rubbed his leg gently. "The limp is real, though. My right leg was partially paralyzed after the poisoning." "So, all this time you've been pretending to be cursed?" Julian gave a dry laugh. "People don't ask questions when they think you're pitiful. I needed that cover, and I needed someone by my side, someone I could trust." He looked directly at her. "I didn't expect it to be you." Elizabeth felt like the floor had tilted beneath her. Her husband, her crippled, quiet, cursed husband, was a billionaire in exile. She should have been furious. Instead, her mind spun with questions. Was she safe? Was he dangerous? And why her? "What do you want from me now?" she whispered. "I want you to stay," he said. "I want you to be part of this. I know I lied. I needed a chance to start again with someone who sees me as a man, not a wallet." The truth hung between them like heavy fog. She didn't answer. Not yet. That night, she couldn't sleep, and outside, the crickets chirped louder than usual, like they, too, were warning her. The following days were heavy with silence. Elizabeth moved around the house like a ghost, unsure of what to say, unsure of who her husband really was. Julian had gone back to his routines: early morning gardening, late-night strategy calls, but now she saw him differently. Every movement, every word felt calculated. He wasn't just hiding from enemies. He was playing a game of survival, and she had been dragged in. Then, one morning, a stranger arrived. He claimed to be a cocoa merchant from Ibadan, interested in starting a farm in the area. But his shoes were too polished, his wristwatch too foreign, and his handshake too firm. Elizabeth served him Zobo, while Julian answered his questions slowly, deliberately. But beneath the politeness, Elizabeth saw it. The quiet tension in Julian's eyes, the way his fingers gripped the chair arm tighter with each question. After the man left, Julian closed all the windows and turned on one of his laptops. Security footage. His name is Danladi. He's not a merchant. He works for Remy Akintola, my former CFO. They're looking for me, he muttered. They know I'm alive. Elizabeth blinked, stunned. So what now? You run again? Julian turned to her, eyes sharp. No, I fight. She didn't know whether to admire him or be terrified. The man she married had once begged her to pass him the salt with shaky hands. Now he was monitoring enemies through satellite cameras and whispering about legal ambushes and forensic audits. Still, a strange thing stirred in her. Pride? Excitement? Fear? That night, as she stood by the window watching Julian limp back inside from the garden, she whispered to herself, "What have I gotten myself into?" And yet somewhere deep inside, a small voice answered, "Destiny." It was raining the next evening when Elizabeth made pepper soup, spiced enough to chase out ghosts. Julian was in the study again, muttering into a headset, too focused to eat. She tapped gently on the door with the tray. "You need food to fight billion-dollar battles," she teased, trying to cut the tension. He opened the door and looked exhausted. "Thanks," he muttered, letting her in. This time she didn't just drop the tray and leave. She sat. The laptops displayed charts, emails, and one long thread of encrypted messages from someone named Zulu Prime. She leaned over, peeking at a document titled Board Takeover Timeline. "You're really planning to take it all back?" she asked. "I have to," he replied, sipping the soup. "They froze my accounts, framed me for fraud, but I have backups, digital evidence, passwords they don't know I changed." He looked at her. "Including some they'll never crack, because I've hidden them where no one would look." "Like?" He hesitated, then gave a mischievous smile. "In places only my wife can help me find." Elizabeth nearly choked on her own saliva. "Me? Why me?" "Because you're the one person they won't suspect. You walk through the market. You hear things. You could deliver a flash drive in plain sight, and no one would question you." She stared at him. "Julian, I was just trying to survive this marriage. I didn't sign up for corporate espionage." He nodded slowly. "But I think you're stronger than you know." She blinked. The words stayed with her long after the pepper soup cooled. That night she couldn't sleep again, but this time it wasn't just fear. It was something sharper. She was being pulled into something far bigger than herself. And she wasn't sure if she wanted out. A week later, Elizabeth found herself in the bustling market square of Akure, not to buy yams or palm oil, but to slip a flash drive into the back pocket of a man wearing a red fez hat. Julian had given her precise instructions. He'll be standing by the roasted corn cellar, pretending to look at baskets. Say nothing, just pass. She wore a faded wrapper, a scarf tied tightly around her head, and carried a basin of plantain chips to complete the disguise. Her heart pounded with every step, but she forced herself to smile, nodding to familiar faces. When she reached the man, she whispered a blessing under her breath and let the flash drive fall into his pocket like a feather. Mission complete. Back at home, she barely breathed until Julian confirmed on his laptop that Red Fez had sent the data to a secure location. "You did it," he said, smiling for the first time in weeks. It lit up his entire face. "I couldn't have done it without you." She shrugged, trying to stay cool. "Well, you did marry a village girl with big dreams." They both laughed. It was strange, this moment of lightness between two people hiding from the world. Later that night, Julian handed her a small wrapped box. Inside was a sleek phone with encrypted messaging software. "You're part of this now," he said. "You need to be protected and connected." Elizabeth looked at the phone, then at him. "So what's next?" Julian's face turned serious. "Now, we turn the tables." And just like that, the village wife became the unexpected partner in a billionaire's war. Julian's enemies didn't stay quiet for long. One hot afternoon, a sleek black Prado SUV rolled into Okedan village, drawing a crowd like flies to honey. Three men stepped out, all in crisp suits, looking ridiculously overdressed for a place where goats still roamed freely. One of them wore designer sunglasses and a smug grin. Elizabeth watched from behind her curtain as they entered Mama Risi's canteen and began asking questions. They introduced themselves as family friends of Julian, here to check on his welfare. But the villagers, curious and suspicious, didn't give them much. When the men finally reached Julian's compound, Elizabeth met them at the gate with practiced calm. "He's resting," she said firmly. "Doctor's orders. He doesn't see guests." One of the men stepped forward. "Tell him Tunde is here. He'll want to see me." Inside, Julian's expression turned stone cold the moment he heard the name. "Tunde Odukoya," he said darkly. "He's the CFO, the one who poisoned me." Julian walked out, leaning heavily on his cane, playing the cripple to perfection. "Tunde," he said, voice hoarse. "I'm alive. Sorry to disappoint you." Tunde smiled coolly. "So it seems. But not for long, I think. Lagos misses you, especially the EFCC." "Tell Lagos to wait," Julian said, eyes flashing. "I'll be back, but on my terms." Tunde leaned closer. "You should have stayed dead, Julian." Julian didn't flinch. "You should have been smarter." As they left, Elizabeth's blood ran cold. These weren't just business rivals. These were men capable of anything. Julian saw it in her eyes. "This is the part where things get dangerous," he said. She nodded slowly. "Then it's a good thing you married a fighter." That night, a storm rolled over Okeiden with the fury of the gods. Thunder shook the roof. Rain crashed against the windows. Elizabeth sat upright in bed, heart pounding not because of the weather, but because of the conversation she just overheard. Julian had been on a secure call, his voice low and dangerous. "If Tunde makes another move, we strike first. Leak the evidence. Full exposure." She wanted to believe she was ready for this world of secrets and power plays, but the truth was she was scared. Scared of what Julian might do. Scared of what he might become. Or already was. He walked in from the study, rain dripping off his shirt. His limp seemed worse. "You heard," he said flatly. She nodded. "You're going to war with him, aren't you?" "He left me for dead," Julian replied. "He stole my company, froze my money, and is now trying to smoke me out. If I don't fight back, we lose everything." Elizabeth stood, wrapping her arms around herself. "And what if fighting back kills you?" Julian paused. Then did something he hadn't done since their wedding night. He took her hands in his. "Then at least I'll go down fighting, beside someone who didn't run when things got real." For a second they stood there, not husband and wife by force, but two people bound by danger and reluctant trust. The storm outside cracked like gunfire. Elizabeth leaned her head on his shoulder and whispered, "Then let's win this thing, together." Julian exhaled deeply. "You have no idea how powerful that makes me feel." That night, as thunder raged and enemies plotted, love or something dangerously close to it began to grow in a room built on lies, loyalty, and the unlikeliest of beginnings. "I need to fake a funeral," he told Elizabeth one morning while she was peeling oranges. She blinked. "Excuse me? We're going to bury the version of me that Tunde thinks is still alive. A convincing funeral, one the media can't ignore. Once they confirm I'm dead, I'll be free to strike from the shadows. Clean, swift, final." Elizabeth stared at him like he had sprouted wings. "So, you want to throw your own funeral? In this village?" He nodded. "With all the drama we can muster. Full-on church service, casket, hired mourners, the works." Despite the madness of it all, Elizabeth had to admit he was brilliant. She helped organize the event with chilling precision. They borrowed a casket from a local undertaker, hired a pastor who had no idea who the deceased was, and paid Mama Chinyeri's choir to sing dirges that made grown men weep. On the day of the funeral, people came from 3 villages away, drawn by curiosity and the promise of free rice. Elizabeth, dressed in black lace, wailed with such conviction that even she started believing she was a widow. Julian watched the entire thing from a tinted car parked behind a mango tree on the hill. When the fake body was lowered into the ground, the cameras captured everything. Later that night, the blog headlines read, Julian and Woke, ex-Coco tycoon, confirmed dead after mysterious village life. Julian turned to Elizabeth and smiled grimly. Perfect. Now that I'm dead, it's time to haunt the living. Elizabeth swallowed. Just promise me you won't become what you're fighting. He didn't answer right away. But the silence, it was enough. 3 days after the funeral, the village of Oak Iden woke up to chaos. Someone had broken into Julian's study. Elizabeth was the first to notice. The door, always locked, hung open with a broken hinge. Papers were scattered. One laptop was gone. The safe had been yanked from the floor, its bolts torn loose like toothpicks. Julian rushed in, limping faster than ever before. No, 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 he muttered, scanning the damage. Elizabeth's heart raced. What did they take? Encrypted files, bank backups, confidential board minutes. Nothing they can decrypt quickly, but enough to make noise. Panic turned to fury. Julian clenched his fists, his calm veneer cracking. They knew where to look. That means someone close gave them access. Elizabeth's breath caught. You think someone in this village sold you out? He nodded grimly. And they probably think I'm still alive now. The funeral bought us time, but not enough. She felt sick. The thought that someone they saw every day, someone who greeted them with good morning and collected wedding rice, might be spying made her skin crawl. Julian installed motion detectors, changed his communication protocols, and placed hidden cameras around the compound. He barely slept. That evening, as they sat under the guava tree in tense silence, Elizabeth whispered, What if they come back? Julian's voice was cold. They won't leave next time. She looked at him, really looked. The soft-spoken man she married was gone. In his place was someone colder, sharper, more dangerous. It scared her, but it also made her realize something deeper. This wasn't just about Julian reclaiming a company. It was about survival, hers too. And suddenly she knew. The real fight had only just begun. The village hadn't seen a helicopter since the governor visited 5 years ago. So when the sleek, black chopper descended from the sky like a giant bird, the villagers ran out barefoot, shielding their eyes and shouting, "Now war don't come, oh!" Julian didn't flinch. He stood in the middle of his compound, cane in hand, wind whipping his shirt, as the rotors screamed above him. Elizabeth stood beside him, heart thudding in her chest. "Whose helicopter is this?" she asked. He gave her a look that sent chills through her spine. "Mine." The helicopter door opened, and out stepped 3 sharp-suited men, lawyers, investigators, and one notorious anti-fraud official Elizabeth had only ever seen on the news. In their briefcases were documents, court orders, and a digital bombshell, Julian's undeniable proof that Tunde Odukoya had embezzled over N8 billion, forged his signature, and attempted murder. It was time for revenge, the legal kind. Rio, Julian held a press conference right there on his front porch. With cameras rolling and media outlets tuned in from Lagos to London, he declared himself alive, very much aware, and fully armed with evidence. "I'm not here to beg," he said. "I'm here to take back what is mine." The internet exploded. Within hours, #Julian Returns was trending. That night, Elizabeth watched the news in awe. This wasn't the man the village called cursed. This was the man the world feared, and she had seen his lowest moment, been part of his quiet war. And now she was part of his rising. As fireworks lit the sky above the compound, Julian's version of celebration, Elizabeth turned to him and smiled. "So what now, husband?" Julian smiled back, his eyes gleaming. "Now, we finish this." Lagos buzzed like an angry wasp nest. Tunde Odukoya's face was plastered all over the news. Breaking, and Woke Coco CFO caught in N8 billion scandal. Arrested in a dramatic raid while trying to flee through a back door of his Lekki mansion. He screamed about witchcraft and betrayal, but no one was listening. Julian watched it all unfold from the village with eerie calm. "He'll deny everything," he said, scrolling through court reports. But the evidence trail is clean, watertight, years of files, forged documents, and internal emails. His lawyer quit this morning. Elizabeth sat beside him, stunned. You really planned all this from the village? He turned to her with a faint smile. Pain gives you clarity. Betrayal gives you focus. Soon after, the company's board released an official apology and begged Julian to return as CEO. But Julian wasn't so easily flattered. I'll return, he told them on a video call, but not to save your skins. I'll return to rebuild it on my own terms. The next day, a convoy of black SUVs arrived in Oak Iden to pick him up. He refused. Instead, he called the village elders, thanked them for their tolerance, and donated $20 million to build a school, clinic, and water project. They thought this village was hiding a ghost, he said, but it raised a warrior. Elizabeth was speechless. This man, the one she had once pitied, had become something else entirely. As they stood together outside their once crumbling compound, Julian reached for her hand. You didn't sign up for this life, he said, but you stayed. When I was broken, when I was angry, when I was lost. She looked at him, eyes misty. I didn't just stay, Julian. I chose you. And for the first time, he believed her. 6 months later, Elizabeth stood at the balcony of a luxury penthouse in Victoria Island, Lagos, sipping fresh pineapple juice, dressed in soft Ankara silk and gold slippers. The city buzzed below, a far cry from the dusty roads of Oak Eden. But her heart, strangely, felt full. Not because of the mansion, or the private drivers, or even the household staff who called her Madam Lizzie. It was because Julian was finally whole. He no longer limped quite as heavily, the rehab helped, but it was more than that. He walked straighter, smiled more, even laughed. He had returned as CEO of Inwoke Cocoa International, but with tighter control and a completely new board. He appointed young, brilliant talents, many from underprivileged backgrounds. He launched a rural cocoa initiative, naming it after Elizabeth's late father. Julian had become a legend, not just for his comeback, but for his humility. Still, he kept his promise. Every quarter, they returned to Oak Eden, not in a convoy, but quietly to sit under the guava tree where the war began. One evening, as they walked barefoot along the beach, he turned to her with a question she wasn't expecting. If I hadn't been rich, if I'd stayed that limping, broken man in the village, would you still have stayed? She paused, thought carefully, then smiled. Maybe not at first, but if I saw the man you are now, even in rags, even with one leg, yes, Julian, I would have stayed. Julian looked out to the ocean, a quiet peace settling on his face. Then maybe all of this, everything I lost, was just a long road to finding what I really needed. Elizabeth leaned her head on his shoulder. You didn't just find it, you married her. And with that, their story born of secrets, forged in fire, became something rare and true, a love that survived the disguise. Do you believe in love that survives lies, danger, and thunder in the sky? Comment below.